supports a double think. It does not matter if the war is not real, or if it is, that victory is not possible. War is not meant to be won. It is meant to be continuous. The essential act of modern warfare is the destruction of the produce of human labor. A hierarchical society is only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. In principle, the war effort is always planned to keep society from the brink of starvation.
I'd like to welcome everybody to a very special broadcast. And I've put together what I believe to be a really good show, and I hope that you all get a lot out of it. I have on the line Mr. Alistair McLeod from financeandeconomics.org and goldmoney.com, Mr. Craig Hemke from tfmetalsreport.com, and Mr. Dave Kranzler from investmentresearchdynamics.com. We're going to be discussing the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All of these things that we are going to be discussing will have a direct impact on you and your life. Make no mistake about that. So I wanted to bring everybody together to kind of lay it out so that everybody would have a much better understanding of what's coming down the pike. And hope that you learned something. Thank you very much for tuning in. There may be some other people that are more studied than you guys, but for me, you guys know more about what's going on with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization than just about anybody out there. And so I wanted to bring you all together to just kind of pick this thing apart and try to get it in front of people and hopefully keep it in front of people so that they'll start thinking about it more often, and start doing some of their own research. So I'm very grateful to have you all here.
Well, I think I think you're right. I mean, it is interesting. I remember interviewing a very well-known historian who does a lot of work on television and all the rest of it, and has written authoritative books and so on. And he's traveled to China and he's looked at China. I asked him about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and he dismissed it. He dismissed it, which is fascinating because talking to old China hands, they have a different view. They got very excited when this happened, and okay, it's sort of from 2002 to now is what, 13 years. You can't maintain a level of excitement every day for 13 years, but they have got a better sense of in China of what it's all about, what their politicians are doing, whereas we in the West sort of think, well, so what? And funnily enough, the guy who came up with the theory which actually best describes it is a guy called Mackinder, who came up with the heartland theory. Basically, he said the heartland, which is the center of the world, runs from the Volga to the Yangtze, and he who controls that controls the world. Interesting. Okay, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in its current form, was founded in the year 2002 on a charter that was agreed principally between China and Russia, but also included a number of states that lie between them. The current membership of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is 35% of the world's population. There are various other countries which are due to join at any moment, probably if not this year, next year, which include India, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, and Mongolia. There are various other countries in Asia which could well join after that. But when the ones who are definitely join, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will be an economic unit encompassing over half the world's population. This is far larger than any other economic bloc we have ever seen. And it has the potential to dominate the world's commerce over the next 20 to 30 years. That's a very brief introduction of what it's about.
Well, why would that be important? I mean, as far as the population and this being an economic bloc, I mean, is that going to be some kind of power center?
Well, really on two levels, Rory. One is obviously power. I mean, we're talking about two nuclear countries, and when India and Pakistan join, that's going to be up to four. But it's the people. The people are rapidly industrializing and increasing their standard of living. The number of middle classes is just increasing exponentially. And that is a process that is going to continue. And that is the whole idea behind the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. One of the objectives that has been agreed between them all is the improvement of infrastructure. And it was really on to further that the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is currently being set up. And it's being set up with a capital of the equivalent of $50 billion, which is going to be increased to $100 billion. But the point is that is, if you like, the institution that will enable the infrastructure investment that is required. And the sort of figure that you should be looking at over the next 20 to 30 years is $25 to $30 trillion worth of infrastructure spending. We're talking about very big money. So once you hoist that on board, you begin to realize why it is that Britain or England decided, they want to be part of this, with the City of London, quite naturally. And no one else really feels that they can afford to be left out. And that is why so many countries have decided to join as founder members of this new supranational investment bank, very much to the annoyance of America, which has dominated the world of global finance, not only through its own currency, but through institutions such as the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and so on and so on. So, it's out with the old and in with the new.
And really a natural progression of things, Rory, in that the Western dollar-based system is all based upon debt and a rapid expansion of debt, which we're finally, it's unsustainable, as most everybody knows, and we're moving toward the end game of that. This new system, where the partner countries make up the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, those are the countries that are the creditors of all this debt. And so it's a logical extension of where this is all headed. I mean, you would logically assume that the creditors of the current system will be the ones that will pull the strings and have a say in what the next system will be. And so besides the demographics and the population, these are the creditor nations, China, India. They'll certainly be adding, the other countries that we consider to be the BRICS, like, Brazil, perhaps eventually as they expand. No doubt Alistair has touched upon it. A lot of news in the last week has been about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as a rival to the IMF or to the World Bank. No question about that. And it also kind of dovetails. A lot of folks might remember the discussions about the BRICS Development Bank a couple of years ago, and Alistair mentioned the $50 billion that has been seeded into this, the AIIB. Well, where did that $50 billion come from? I mean, it came from China, and no doubt a kind of reallocation of some of their foreign currency reserves, most notably treasuries. And so where they're already in just the stated data, drawing down what their actual treasury supply is or what their holdings are, this is another way to kind of covertly continue to draw down their treasuries and diversify them by pledging them. It's like a rich person who puts money in a trust and hides it away. Same kind of thing here with China and their foreign currency reserves. They plunk some of it, $50 billion, into something like the AIIB as a way of liquidating them without formally liquidating them for everyone to see in a public declaration. And so this is all definitely headed this direction. And as you said, a lot of folks want to have their heads in the sand. I think a lot of that is due to normalcy bias. Very hard to imagine the world of tomorrow being any different than the world of yesterday, but it most definitely is. And that's why it's good to be out here discussing things like this to help people to get their heads around what is most definitely coming.
For the benefit of the people listening, I just wanted to list the members of the SCO. I mean, what amazes me is the fact that you never hear anything about the SCO in the mainstream media. I mean, it basically dead silence in terms of Western media. But the member states are Kazakhstan, China, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. And then the observer states are Afghanistan, India, Iran, Mongolia, and Pakistan. And then they have what they call dialogue partners, and those are Belarus, Turkey, and Sri Lanka. And I think you're looking at more than an organization that represents more than 2/3 of the world's population base. And I saw the statistic a while ago, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's well more than 50% of the global landmass. And it's incredible that something this comprehensive just gets absolutely no exposure in the Western media. And I remember I had first heard about it. I don't know if you guys remember Bill Buckler's Privateer.
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, he, early on when I was getting into this whole sector, which is back in 2001, he put out 10 times a year. He's based in Australia, and it was probably one of the best, most comprehensive sort of geopolitical economic newsletters out there, and his research was incredible. But I first read about the SCO in his Privateer newsletter, and I actually, as fate would have it, I found a reference to that actual newsletter on the internet, because the Privateer, I think he shut it down in 2010 or something like that. It was a shame. But this is from the Privateer in April 2006. It was recently announced that Iran, India, Mongolia, and Pakistan are to become full SCO members. Inviting Iran into the SCO is a huge geopolitical event. Now, all of the SCO, including Russia and China, will adopt a common position on the Iranian nuclear issue. The SCO's enlargement will now block the entire U.S. strategy in the Middle East. Iran is now safer having both Russia and China as geopolitical backstops. Now, that was in 2006, and that probably goes a long way to explaining why the U.S. is not getting its ways right now in the negotiations over Iran's nuclear development program. But what struck me, and I remember this is back in 2006 when I first started reading about this. What struck me about this was that this organization is kind of quietly a geopolitical, military, and economic challenge to NATO. And when you think about it, that's really what it is. Mm-hmm. And so how it could avoid scrutiny of the Western media is just, it's beyond comprehension, at least to me.
I think part of the answer, if I can suggest this, Dave, is that the West has been so wrong-footed on it that they have avoided briefing the media on anything to do with the SCO.
There's probably that in there also. I think the West doesn't even know what to do with it, because this is a direct challenge to the NATO bloc.
Absolutely right. And indeed, I think America's floundering around over the establishment of the AIIB is evidence of what you've just said.
And I would add one more thing. Dave, you was rattling off the member states of the SCO, and 3 of them are Russia and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. That's always the one with missing a few vowels.
I never know how to pronounce that.
It's all right. We know what you mean.
But anyway, those are the 3 countries that Vladimir Putin sought to. He mentioned last week he's seeking to align in a currency union, a Eurasian new currency union. Russia with those 2 stans. And here they are, 3 of the formal members of the SCO. And so I just kind of wanted to put that out there, just so people realize that there's all of this infrastructure being put in place behind the scenes, no doubt about that.
And it's all being done very quietly, very, very quietly. You get little blips here and there. we're gonna get it more into the currency aspect here in just a minute. I wanted to ask you guys, and we'll start with you, Craig. What specific resources are going to be affected, to your knowledge?
Well, from an energy standpoint, and natural resources, we already know about Russia. They export 14% of the world's crude oil, besides all the other minerals like gold and platinum. Very interesting. If people have been following the story about rare earths, China has essentially cornered the market on rare earth production. Great. If anybody has the time, they should go to the American news site for 60 Minutes, the American documentary program that airs every Sunday on CBS News. They had a nice segment this last Sunday about rare earths and how the U.S. is, through all the regulation and environmental protections and everything else, is pretty much out of that business, and how China completely dominates that market. And that's just another example. You talk about labor costs. That scheme has been in place here in the West for 40 or 50 years now, to ship jobs and manufacturing to all of these, I guess at one point called third world nations, where things can be manufactured cheaply so that we can buy them and ship our dollars overseas, that then they have to then ship them back and recycle them into treasuries. Anyway, this whole area is an economic powerhouse, natural resource powerhouse going forward. But I that's all part of it, no doubt about it. But I want to get back, in my mind, it's the creditor nation aspect. It's the fact that they now see these countries are aligning because they recognize that there is a new way of business that's going to be taking place in the 21st century. That the 20th century model, the Bretton Woods model, the U.S. dollar standard model, is doomed. It's just not sustainable. And they are setting, where they weren't ready to do this in 2008, to immediately move to a new system. The time since the great financial crisis has been utilized to set up all these various infrastructures. And there's just no question that this is the way it's headed. And again, it gets back to whether an individual or an organization in the West is willing to open their eyes and look over the horizon and be willing to see where this is going. In terms of I guess my specialty, if you want to call it that, in precious metals, I don't think there's any question that after this latest global experiment in fiat currency, that these creditor nations aren't going to recognize the folly of that and somehow incorporate some type of hard asset backing, whether it's gold or a collection of hard assets or whatever, into this new global economic structure. Now, I don't know if China's going to back the yuan with gold, or Russia's going to back the ruble with gold, or whatever. I don't know if it'll be that, or it'll be some type of gold-backed trading note like Jim Willey likes to talk about. But there will be a more hard asset, sound money type system that is eventually developed, and it will come out of organizations like the SCO. So that will be the new system. How that impacts all of us in the West will certainly be detrimental for most folks that aren't preparing for this event. And like I said, the wise thing is for folks to do the research now so they can understand what's coming.
There is an aspect of this which is very interesting, I think, and that is that China has secured for the future an awful lot of commodity production. She almost controls Africa, south of the Sahara, commercially. And I was amazed. I had to do some dealing with a stockbroker in Lusaka, which is the capital of Zambia, which you probably never heard of. And the amazing thing was that when the telephone systems are not all that great, and it sort of takes you back sort of 40 years. You get all lines are engaged. Now, all lines were engaged was said in English and in Chinese, for goodness sake. This is the amazing thing. So the Chinese are so numerous and so important to a country like Zambia, which admittedly is one of the largest copper producers in the world, that the telephone system defaults to Chinese on the voicemail. I was absolutely amazed. But it does show just the degree of control over resources that China has quietly managed to accumulate, because her two sources are basically Asia and Africa now. And I think that a lot of the logic behind the SCO is that you have got Russia, which has the resources, and China has the manufacturing power. And between those two, they have got the wherewithal to control the SCO, as certainly in the early stages of its fuller integration and development. But the whole thing is interesting historically, because there was a British man called Mackinder, who, amongst other things, was the first man to climb Mount Kenya, which was over 17,000 foot on the equator. But anyway, what he did was he produced a report for the Royal Geographical Society back in about 1917, round about then, 17 or 19, with what he called his heartland theory. And in this theory, he posited that the most important part of the globe in terms of geopolitics and economic control is what he called the heartland. And the heartland basically was, if you like, the USSR, what became the USSR. So we're talking about from Eastern Europe all the way over to the Chinese border. What he said was that he who controls the heartland controls the inner world, which was the rest of Asia and Africa. And the outlying world and outlying islands basically were places like Britain, Australia, and America. And it's fascinating that nearly 100 years after that theory was posited, that is exactly where the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is going.
It's incredible that this guy would have that insight back then.
It is amazing. He's well worth Googling, actually. Mackinder, Mackinder, I think.
I mean, it's obvious for anyone with their eyes open that Russia and China have been spending the better part of the last 10 years accumulating as much of the world's natural resources as they can, and also putting in the infrastructure for redistributing it.
And that trend will continue. And you guys have touched on the currencies a time or two. And do you see, or do you believe that there's going to be a common currency? Are we going to move towards, as far as global trade, towards an SDR? Or is it going to be all currency swap agreements? And what role do you see that the RMB or the renminbi, yuan, or Russian ruble playing, if they're going to play any role at all? And Dave, we'll start out with you.
It's been my view that I don't think the SDR is going to be the dollar replacement. I think the U.S. would like the SDR to be the dollar replacement as a global reserve currency. And I do find it interesting that China is pushing to become get the yuan as being part of the SDR basket. Of course, on the other hand, I think they also probably have ulterior motives for doing that. But I kind of take the line that Dr. Paul Craig Roberts takes, in that, why does the world need a reserve currency? Because all you do when you establish a reserve currency is put the bulk of the economic and political power into the issuer of that reserve currency. And so I guess, just from my personal standpoint, I would hope that the SDR does not become the dollar replacement as the world's reserve currency. I also think, if you just look at what China's doing, part of it being this development of the SCO, the AIIB, the BRICS Bank, etc. I think China's trying to wrestle away power from the West. So it doesn't make sense to me that all of a sudden they would want to jump in and become part of a piece of paper that's issued by a Western-controlled organization, being the IMF. So one thing I've learned over the last 15 years is the more I think I have figured out what's going to happen next, the less I really know about what's going to happen next. But I do think that what looks like the obvious path we're headed down, which, and of course, everyone on the Western side of the world thinks the SDR is going to be the dollar replacement. I think whatever seems to be the obvious choice is probably not going to be the ultimate choice.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk out there that China is just going to continue to play ball within the current system, and they may for a while until they feel that whatever the next system is ready to roll. I mean, it wasn't ready to roll in 2008. I don't know to what extent they were caught flat-footed by what happened. But they will probably continue to play along until they're ready to whatever infrastructure is needed to roll in a different direction. I don't know if eventually, as Dave said, there will be some new global. Outside of a devastating war or some other type of financial crisis, I'm not sure that the world would make that transition again like it did after World War II. And war is probably another thing we should talk about at some point today, or at least the potential for it, because these transitions rarely occur peacefully and orderly. And so I think that's something we're probably all concerned about, is how this will shake out in that sense. I thought a long time ago, though, that it would make sense if I were a Chinese central planner, and these folks, are always purported to be looking at things in 20 and 50 and 100-year time horizons, that if I were a Chinese central planner, I would ultimately be scheming to have that exorbitant privilege, as Secretary Connolly called it back in the 60s and 70s, to have that ability to have at least a regionally based, if not globally based, reserve currency, just because it gives you such demand for your currency and allows you to just print it like crazy if you need to mollify and pacify the masses. And for the Chinese Politburo that's trying to manage 1.2 billion people and try to keep them from potentially overthrowing the system due to discontent, well, what do? You keep them fat and happy, just like the American politicians have done here for the last 40 years. And if you're going to need to print your currency in such a manner, you need to have demand for it. How do you get demand for it? You make your currency into some type of reserve currency, or somehow make it attractive on the world stage by backing it with hard assets and make it convertible or whatever. So I've always thought there was a rationale for the Chinese to do this. Again, this is not something that they're probably looking to do sometime later this week, but I would assume has been on their radar for quite some time, and it's being transitioned in that sense over time.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Firstly, on the SDR, I don't rate the SDR. It's paper on paper, so you've got the same problems with SDRs, and I don't think that's the solution. I think what the Chinese do realize is that in order for their currency to dominate trade throughout the SCO, then it has to be better than the dollar. And that means more sound than the dollar. And I think this is probably where, in some undefined way, gold really enters into the picture. Mm-hmm. And nothing happens in China without it being deliberately planned. And the fact that the Chinese people have acquired an awful lot of gold as individuals is quite simply planned. And one wonders why. I think that the answer has got to be probably twofold. Firstly, that if people actually have gold, they tend to be more peaceful. And this is important in the Chinese constant in China's political context, simply because there are so many diverse ethnic groupings in China. I think there's something like 42 odd. And if it wasn't for a strong central government, they'd probably be at each other's throats. So gold, if you like, as a peacemaker, I think is very, very important. And I think the second thing is that once gold is part of a sounder currency than we're used to in the West, then that automatically is going to give the Chinese people a spending power which, quite honestly, nobody else really has. So you can see that there is, if you like, a logic from that point of view. Now, obviously, I'm discussing this from the point of view of Austrian or quasi-Austrian economics. If the Chinese are going to understand this, they've got to understand they've got to have the same sort of economic approach. They've got to understand the fallacies behind the West's Keynesian approach and the idea that you can achieve economic objectives by manipulating the value of the currency. But I think in Russia they do sort of realize this, because the head of the central bank there, who previously was Putin's personal economic advisor, she is sort of quite Austrian in her approach to things. I think if you like, the worst of the Keynesian ideas that we inflict on our people in the West is something that they're not really going to be inflicting on their people in the future. But there is one big problem before they actually manage to come out with a currency which is going to stand the test of time, and that is that China has a huge, great credit bubble which has got to deflate. And I understand from my contacts in China that they are going to be deliberately working on deflating that bubble, and we're already seeing signs of it. The problem is that we all know, as Austrian economists, that any government trying to deflate a credit bubble in a controlled way actually ends up making an awful mess of it. And I'm afraid the Chinese are not going to be no different. So I can see a huge wave of deflation effectively being exported out of China into the global economy. As far as China itself is concerned, I think they could probably manage it because they don't have the burden of the welfare state. They can let this thing run through, and there'll be massive unemployment. There'll be so much malinvestment, probably even being destroyed so that things can be redeployed. But I think China could probably survive that. It won't be comfortable. It's not something that we can survive in the West, which is why we're condemned to try and print as a long-term strategy. So I think that's the first thing before we can sort of really talk about what form the Chinese currency is going to take, other than it has got to be more credible than the dollar, which suggests that gold should have a role.
I would think that you guys are right in your assessment that gold and probably silver or possibly silver will play a role, because and I hadn't thought of what you had said there, Alistair, as far as the Chinese encouraging their citizenship to possess gold for the reasons that you gave, which is a more peaceful and serene person. And it helps them to be prepared for the next phase. They'll have actual money already. Yeah. They'll already be part of the upcoming system. And what do you guys think that the BRICS nations that are not part of, which would be South Africa and Brazil, the other three are China, Russia, and India. Do you see those guys playing sort of a central role or any role whatsoever within the SCO? And we'll start with you, Alistair.
Well, I think as trade counterparties, I see them having an enormous role, yes, because we're talking about commodity-rich nations. But I don't see them ever joining the SCO, because the SCO is an Asian phenomenon. They could end up with some sort of associate membership of the SCO. I wouldn't rule that out, but I think it's a long way away. And so far as I can divine, I don't think that there is any planning that they should be involved with that. But there is no doubt that the establishment of a BRICS bank, which will be completely separate from the dollar-dominated global supranational banks, I think is angled very much at helping relationships between the SCO bloc and other countries around the world who trade with them. So again, I think the BRICS Bank is going to be very much involved with trade deals, loans against future trade, all this sort of stuff. And I think that's going to be the way that they'll go, rather than actually joining the SCO.
I would agree I would agree with Alistair. I'll just put it that way. I think that's right. It is primarily an Asian organization, but in terms of currency agreements and trade cooperation. I'm sure it will extend to all those other creditor nations that you mentioned, Roy.
So, in my mind's eye, and my theoretical mind, I kind of see the BRICS as being more of the central government for the SCO. And the reason that I say that is because you have the extension of South Africa and you have the extension of Brazil, which gives the SCO this enormous reach, global reach, and being able to impact every single nation in the world and having a direct impact on it.
But I see it more as rather than calling them member states, perhaps more like just affiliated states, like a new G7 in a sense, a new G20. I guess I see it more that way than a tightly affiliated economic union. Maybe just more of a we're all in this together, we're all in the same boat type, rowing in the same direction. So I don't know if you'd ever see an actual formal inclusion as a direct alliance or union, but they would certainly be part of, countries like South Africa or Brazil or again, any place that is a dollar creditor nation. I definitely see them as part of this alliance, if you will.
I guess kind of the way I look at the various organizations is I kind of see the BRIC Bank as sort of being China and Russia's answer to the IMF. The way I look at it is you're seeing these Eastern allied countries challenging, what's been essentially Western dominance for the better part of a couple hundred years, and certainly once Russia fell, U.S. weighted Western dominance since, I don't know what, probably since Nixon closed the gold window. Because that's what really gave the U.S., the full power over the reserve currency when it no longer had to back the treasuries issued to foreigners by gold, and the world was willing to accept it for whatever reason. But I kind of look at the BRIC Bank as being sort of the Eastern and, the Southern Hemisphere's counterpart to the IMF, and the AIIB as a challenge to the World Bank, and then the SCO clearly is Asia's challenge to NATO.
And too, again, when people hear these terms, BRIC Bank or AIIB, and you think of bank, you think, well, a bank has money in it, right? And this money has to come from somewhere. And unless I'm misreading this entirely, the money to fund these organizations is coming from U.S. Treasury obligations that are part of the foreign currency reserves of these creditor nations. And so as those Treasury obligations get moved into these banks, if you will, they're eventually liquidated and sold on the market. And so you turned into dollars, and then those dollars get sold and converted into whatever the local currency is, or put directly into infrastructure or whatever. But at the end of the day, this is a freeing up of all of these, I guess we'll call it quarantine, or what was the term they used to use? Sterilized, if you will. All these dollars that have been put out into the world over the last 40 years that have been, again, quarantined, sterilized into treasuries that are held on global central bank balance sheets. Well, if those treasuries are now getting freed back up and those dollars are now getting kicked back out into the global system, they're all coming home here into the U.S. And that is a tremendous, all this extra supply of dollars only further serves to devalue the dollars that are currently floating around in the system, and creates great inflationary pressures, creates great rising interest rate pressures here in the U.S., which, again, the sustainability of our Ponzi relies upon low interest rates at zero. And so this is all a real big potential mess that is going to have far-reaching implications, and it's really just a natural evolution of the system. And that's, again, why I guess it's valuable to have calls like this so that people are thinking in terms of how this all fits together and what the implications are, not only in the long term, but in the near term, because you've really got to be aware that these changes are coming, whether you want to bury your head in the sand and stick to your normalcy bias or not. This is all coming. These countries are looking out for themselves and they're planning for the future, and that's going to have tremendous impact on everybody in the West.
Can I say something about the geopolitical aspect of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank?
Absolutely.
It is very interesting because when this was first mooted, obviously America was going around making sure that nobody was going to join it. And Australia and New Zealand, or particularly Australia, said, no, of course we won't join it. But then what happened was that Britain decided, was it last week or the week before last, that she was going to become a founder member. And that just opened the floodgates. Everybody went in. And the point about the AIIB is not the 50 billion, but it is an enabler of infrastructure investment, which, as I said earlier, could be $25 to $30 trillion worth of spend. And there is an awful lot of infrastructure financing to be done. And so, London very definitely wants to have, if you like, a sort of a seat at that table. And you can see exactly the same thing for, Germany, who want to sell equipment into the SCO for sort of earth moving and, all that sort of stuff. Even France, Italy, everybody's getting on side. And even Australia, having told the Americans, yes, of course we're on side, they're now going. So we have a situation from both ends of the earth, which is very detrimental as far as American hegemony is concerned. If you look at the Pacific, basically everybody in the Pacific is abandoning the pure relationship with America and moving towards Asia and the SCO through trying to be part of the AIIB. If you look at NATO, on the other hand, we have the same thing. Now, Russia is not a founder member of the AIIB, but you can bet your bottom dollar that she is pulling the strings in the background in conjunction with China. And the fact that she is not on the board basically allows all the NATO members in Europe to go on the board of not go on the board, but become founder members of the AIIB. America knows that, this is a real problem, because we now have a situation where the only NATO members who are really going to be very keen to have no relationship with Russia and stop them from expanding in any way are the Baltic states and Poland. Everybody else within NATO has now got a different commercial agenda, and that is to do business with Russia as a member of the SCO. So you can see that the days when we were all just about to go to war against the Ukraine or whatever, about the Ukraine or whatever it is, that suddenly has taken a rather nasty jolt. And coming on to the point which I think Craig was making about war earlier on, I think this is actually a very positive development, because in the event that America decides she wants to step up action against Russia, she's not going to get the support of NATO anymore, of her other NATO members. She's going to be outvoted, in effect. And the same is true in the Pacific. So, in a sense, commerce has effectively taken the fangs out of the American. No, I was going to say American lion, because bald eagles don't have fangs.
Well,
the metaphors are getting a bit mixed here, but I think you know what I mean.
I hope you're right, Alistair.
I do. But I do think that it's a lot more difficult for America to start, something which just escalates and escalates if she is on her own. Either that, or you could take the view, if she doesn't get a move on and do it very, very quickly, then she won't have the support to do it later. So you could read it either way. But for the moment, I see your government as being somewhat dysfunctional. And unable to really make up its mind on matters like this. You've got a military which seems to be, in terms of strategic advice, stuck in a world which is 30 years out of date. With a bit of luck, the development of this commercial interest, Asia, this new super state which today we call the SCO, I think is probably going to be a good thing, and hopefully will lessen the chances of the sort of all-out war which we all obviously fear.
Well, but as you mentioned, though, Alistair, where is the cooperation still lying in this conflict with Russia over Ukraine? It's in the Baltic states and with Poland. And where is the U.S. stationing advisors and battalions of advisors and military equipment? In the Baltic states and in Poland. And so even as Merkel and Hollande seem to recognize what's going on, and they're desperately, almost valiantly trying to scale things back, doesn't seem to be affecting the U.S.'s plans to move forward and try to villainize and push this conflict as far as they can. And I'm genuinely concerned that, I mean, history is not full of examples of this type of transition going peacefully and orderly. And I would be very much surprised. I mean, obviously as an American citizen, I'm not going to sit here and try to say that we have the best of intentions or that, or the most honorable intentions in trying to defend ourselves. But I do think there will be those with the power will be reluctant to just simply hand it over and give it up. And they'll do everything they can to maintain the status quo and keep the power as long as they can. And that's where I just worry that, again, this transition won't be peaceful and orderly. But like you said, though, there are signs maybe that economics will trump all of that, and we'll just all get along and try to make toward the best end game possible. But I'm not optimistic.
Well, we unwound our empire. We realized we couldn't afford it anymore. I mean, that was economics that did it more than anything else. So anyway, we don't know, but I think there's a little hope in there, which I'd like to inject into the debate.
Well, I mean, the thing is, let's be honest here. I mean, everything that's going on militarily in Ukraine and Poland, for example, I mean, it's being done under the guise of NATO, but it's mostly the U.S. It's U.S. equipment. It's U.S. military personnel. It's basically the execution of U.S. strategic military policy. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I fall more into Craig's camp on this in that I just don't. I think that. I laughed when Alistair referred to the U.S. government as being dysfunctional, and I think that was an understatement. I think, unfortunately, the deep-seated power inside the government is controlled by, I guess just to put a label on it, neoconservatives. And I just don't ever. I can't find any example in history when a global power has relinquished its quest to hold on to its power without creating some sort of military conflict.
And again, as Alistair pointed out, the unwinding of the British Empire and the move away from the pound as a reserve currency. I guess, and not to disagree with you, Alistair, I understand your point, but there were 2 world wars in between.
And I'm not sure it was peaceful either. I mean, let's go back to the American Revolution. I mean, you could probably trace part of it back to that.
Yeah. So let's hope.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we hope. I mean,
I'm not digging bunkers.
I'm not sure the unwind of the UK was peaceful.
Well, it is interesting because my uncle actually was colonial secretary at the time when. All the sort of African countries were given their independence. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a deliberate act of policy, and it started with Harold Macmillan's Wind of Change speech in South Africa. And he said there's a change going through Africa, and it was becoming clear that the politics, it wasn't so much economics at that stage. I mean, though economically we were very, very weakened by a mixture of the cost of wars and the socialism that followed it. But we just couldn't. We couldn't hold on to those countries, so we did the only thing we could, and that was sort of graciously back out. And I think, please let me at least hope that there's someone in America who might see things in a similar light, sort of 50 years on.
Well, President. I
mean, I'm not talking about putting money on this. I should say.
No. Hey, Alistair, President Hemke will see it that way if he's ever elected. But
the Lord help us.
Again, I'm not trying to. I don't want to. This is just a talking point. This isn't something that everybody should run off that's listening to us. I mean, this is not something that dominates my day. That I'm not digging bunkers in my backyard. But to that end, because it is I guess a metaphor, or it's an example of the most recent time we went through this. As Britain was unwinding her empire, one of her closest allies, both economically and militarily, was succeeding her as this new global hegemon, the global reserve currency and all that stuff. We're talking going forward. The West not having that same, ally with the new power. The new power is not going to be a traditional economic and military ally. And so that just kind of leaves us at loggerheads in a sense, and it just doesn't leave me, as Dave said, optimistic that those in power are just, I guess our time's up. We'll just kind of transition into working with this new system. No, they'll probably defend it with all they have. And that's the biggest underlying concern in my mind.
I would accept that is a very, very significant danger. I'm trying to be rational.
I know, and it's only Tuesday morning, and I need a drink.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, well, I think enough of the war. Anyway, oh dear. But we're going through interesting times. Very briefly, I think the FOMC minutes were very important. I don't know if to what extent that's been a topic for you guys, but it does seem to me that putting off what was signaled as a rise in interest rates in the middle of the year to sometime never is very, very important. And I think it is becoming clear that the way the Fed is looking at this is that they are rather boxed in. They can't raise interest rates. The only way they can raise interest rates is if there is genuine economic recovery going on in the United States. And that, as we all know, is not the case. The unemployment figures are a myth. The inflation figures are a myth. And the consequence of that is that if the Fed was to raise the Fed funds rate, all that would happen is that all the commercial banks would queue up, knocking on the door, saying, "Can we lend you some money?" And that is not the intent. It would probably collapse the bond market very rapidly. And I think the fact that the bond market hasn't already taken a very nasty knock is indicative of the system assuming that interest rates are not going to rise. So, but that's got huge implications for the future purchasing power of the dollar. If they can't normalize interest rates, then the dollar is finished. It's actually, so you've got that on the one hand, you've got the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank on the other, and you've got all these things coming together into some sort of crunch point, which I guess is probably not all that far away.
I'd like to interject something. Dave and I interviewed Jim Willey yesterday, and one of the things that he pointed out was the acceleration of events. When the United States implemented the sanctions on Iran, and they threw Iran out of the SWIFT system, blew up their currency, at that moment, I have to believe that Russia said, we have to do something about this. They were already partners, for lack of a better term, by way of the SCO and their negotiations or their discussions in the SCO. So now we have Russia has a SWIFT system. They also have a credit card system, credit rating system as well. So you have all of these events just with Russia. And then you have China doing basically the same thing. So you have all of these things that are accelerating, combined with what you were just saying, Alistair, about the Federal Reserve coming to the realization that the lie is not working. We can never, ever, under any circumstances, raise interest rates because that would expose everything.
You're absolutely right, Rory. It's a latter-day industrial revolution, in effect, encompassing the whole of Asia. England took off. The industrial revolution here took off basically when canals were built. It meant that things could be transported, and then they were superseded by railways. They're going to be doing this throughout Asia with not just railways, as you rightly say, roads, air transport, but also electricity, electronics, all that side of modern life. The middle classes, the number of middle class of the total number of people who will have money, will be spending, will be newly enriched by this new rapid industrial revolution, are beyond imagination. They really are. When we had our industrial revolution, we managed to dominate the whole world on a population in those days of about 30 million. We're talking now half the world's population undergoing the same process.
It's interesting, Alistair, because then you can also parallel that with the Industrial Revolution that occurred in the United States. You probably tie it to the mass manufacturing process that Henry Ford started. But and then this country dominated the world on a population base of 300 million.
Yeah,
and now you're looking at a population base. If you look at the whole SCO sort of BRIC consortium, maybe 3 billion?
Yeah, it's about 3 billion. That's absolutely right.
It's kind of interesting the geometry there and how it's you're seeing the shift. And I just wanted to mention, and again, this is another aspect that never gets mentioned in the mainstream media or the financial media in this country, but it certainly gets a lot of attention in the alternative media. Underneath all of this sort of trading issues and infrastructure development is the fact that all these countries are now transacting with each other in their respective currencies. They're bypassing the dollar, and I think there's a lot of significance to that goes unspoken in this country.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely.
Appreciate it. We've been speaking with Alistair McLeod from goldmoney.com and financeandeconomics.org. Got Dave Kranzler from investmentresearchdynamics.com, and of course the always entertaining Mr. Craig Hemke from tfmetalsreport.com. And guys, I cannot thank you enough for all your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Rory. This has been
really enjoyable. Thanks, you guys.
A real pleasure.